And it's, okay, go ahead, David.
Welcome to the Freedom Lover Show. We're building a voluntary world, one relationship at a time. I'm your host, David James Rodriguez, and we have a special guest today, and her name is Miss Jacquie Figg. She is the founder of idpsolutions.org, and she helps people unhook from the system. And so we met through a friend, through Anarcha Vegas, and just talking about voluntary relationships and freedom. We just want to be free, and we're starting to realize that tyranny isn't coming, ladies and gentlemen. Tyranny is here. And so how to do it without being slammed by the force and the coercion of the state, that's, I think, what we're interested in. And I actually want to make sure that they can see me. I'm not sure if they did or not, so we'll do that right there. I'm not sure if this is working, but we're going to try it out. Hopefully this is all good. Because, I see you, and I'm in the corner there. Okay, so there's a group called Voluntary Village Creators on Facebook, which I started, and so this is where the conversation can continue. But Jacquie, you have some good knowledge of helping people break away in a strategic place to not, like I said, be hurt or harmed by the state. So we want to help people in doing that. And I just want to make sure on your screen there, do you see anything that says speaker view? Do you see that there?
There is a speaker view, yes.
Okay, and did you hit that?
No, I usually like to see all the little squares.
Okay, all right. So I guess we'll figure this out and take it one step at a time. This is a big conversation. So welcome to the show. Thanks for taking some time to come share some of your knowledge with the audience here. And where should we begin? Because, you know, the problem is that the state is a coercive organization. They assume jurisdiction because, well, they just assume it, and we fall into it. Sadly, many of us register our kids with the state through the social security number and the birth certificate and all this stuff. And so we're starting to awaken that they're just a unilateral organization. They just put the contract there, and we say, oh, this is the way it is. I guess this is the way it is. But now the next evolution for freedom is that, no, we have unalienable rights. And this has already been determined 250 years ago. And so how can a family or an individual begin this process? And would you just start us off with the basics, and we'll go back and forth here. And
Okay.
if the audience member has some questions, feel free. But for the most part, feel free to start at the beginning of what to do. School is also an important thing, but just in the beginning, how can people start to think about it and begin to unhook from the system?
So, like you said, this is about voluntary relationships, and there are choice. In America, you do have a choice. There's a choice of law, and there is the consent of the governed. Very important aspects that people need to understand and utilize. So you were mentioning about, you know, families and stuff, and it is presumed. It's not just presumed. What's happened is, and we see it happening in other countries right now, like Peru. We see there's a big change going on where taxes are coming in, people are having to start getting licenses. And this is the first generation in Peru, for instance, that has had to buy food. Previously, they grew their own food or could go up into the jungle, into the mountain areas or other areas where the village kind of grew their food, and they would bring food down. And so this is the first generation. So here we have what, 3 generations maybe, where this is, we've lost the art of taking care of ourselves. And more than that, we have become so intertwined in relying on the system. So all of our kids are, and when I say all, I understand there are some people out there whose kids are not raised, but on the whole, it seems like it's the default that you have your child in a hospital. Once you've left the hospital, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, the kid goes to state-run school. After they're in state-run school, they sign up for, you know, military service or the services, you know, some form within there. And then they, you know, they get a debt from higher education and go into work. And by that time, you're already along this pattern where, you know, there's a pattern and practice. So 3 generations of driver's licenses, you know, 3 generations of being born in hospitals. And so it's like a wheel that just keeps happening, and people don't know that there is actually a choice out there. So one of the things that I advocate is it's really important. I want to tell you, the state is a spiteful entity. It does not like to let people go. You know, this is a Moses moment, you know, let my people go. It does not like to let people go. And so you have to unhook carefully. You need to protect your property. And when I say protecting your property, there's this great belief amongst the rich, for instance, where they say, own nothing, control everything. I'm sure people have actually heard that saying before. Very important saying. You literally do not want to own things. You want to control things. When you own things, you have the liability. But more than that, when you wake up and you start to realize what's going on and you start to assert yourself, you're now in, you have problems. Your things that you think you own become in jeopardy because the state will grab them. And that goes for everything from your car to your real property, taking away your licenses, and as many of your people know, children. They will come after children. So for some of us, we've seen what I would consider to be a rash of state intervention. So I got attacked, you know, by code enforcement, police. My children, they went after my children. So there was a lot of things that I saw, and I started to see, oh, this is kind of interesting. Individually, you know, you can kind of handle it, but when you've got like what I consider to be a rash going on, it makes it really difficult. Until you realize that there's a common denominator here, and that is a resident. Once you are determined to be the resident of the state, then there's problems. And I know for a lot of people, that's kind of difficult to understand because there's a lot of benefits that come from residency. But when you look at residency, some of the things that you're looking at is the address where you are registered to vote would be your residence. And because you're registered to vote, you would be a resident. Another thing that may bring you into that layer would be registering your car, having a driver's license. That's one of the big ones. Having your children in elementary school, attending college with the resident tuition, because that's a benefit. So if you accept the resident tuition, that brings you into that layer. And these are all kinds of ways that we consent to being governed. So we sign some sort of agreement. We say, yes, I'm a resident of this state, or yes, I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm trying to get this benefit, and in applying for that benefit, that ties you in to the state's control.
Got it.
Yeah. So so the great thing about that is it is self-determined. It is up to us. This is controllable. It makes it controllable by us. I consider this to be akin to domestic violence, what I see the state doing to people. And the great thing about it is, in anyone that's been in any kind of situation like that, what you first do is you assess what was your role, what did you do to participate in it, and what could you do to change? Because you can't change others. I can't change the state, but I can change my participation within the state. So once I protected my stuff, once I protect my people, now I can start to unhook and look at what was my, sorry, what was my participation. And in doing that, that's where you start to look at all the various contracts that exist with the state, and you begin withdrawing from those contracts. Now, it's not easy. I mean, as you know, that's why I really liked what you had to say. So I've never really wanted to look at the children aspect. It breaks my heart what I see going on in the schools. And right. Yeah, and as soon as I heard you speak, I'm like, there's the element of having your child in an elementary school. It completely unhooks from that element of residency. And it's really important for those people who you help to actually see that, because anyone who's having any problems with their children, i.e., let's say forced vaccinations, let's say military service, let's say your kid gets in trouble at school. You know, all of us want to be able to discipline our children ourselves. And when we give out register our kids in the system as such, they take control of that. They then tell us, this is what you're going to do. And a lot of the times, the problems occur when parents sign agreements with the school. We're always in trouble for promising to do something and then breaching that promise. So, a failure to appear, a failure to do they'll give you a list of things that your child was supposed to do. And eventually they'll even have a situation where maybe the parent has to come to school with the child if the child has got in trouble a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And this has all been by agreement. It's all been part of the consent to being governed. So I think that's a really important thing for people to understand. Got it.
Okay, so we have the Voluntary Village Creators group. We want a voluntary village, a neighborhood, eventually like a town, like a city, right? Like how to escape these guys. So one, you mentioned the driver's license. So I'm starting to learn about this. There's a gentleman, freedomfromgovernment.org I'm learning about. But just so some of the viewers know, and I'm still learning too, but we don't need permission to travel. Traveling is our life and our liberty, and that's that's a natural right from creator or universe or whatever. And so they somehow tricked us into getting this license. And so now, if you try to go, fight these citations or speeding violations, right? These stats, it's all revenue generation. And, there's a gentleman named Mark Stevens. I used his method, which is, where's the evidence that this law applies to me? And it comes down to either the law applies to you because you're physically in California, these imaginary borders we made up. And then the other one is because you have a driver's license. So because you have a driver's license, you are now under our jurisdiction. And that's how I tried to fight two of these different ones in court. And that's what they said. Two separate counties. They said, well, your driver's license means you contracted with us. And they didn't say it like that, but they said you have a driver's license. So what are your thoughts on the driver's license, the license plate, we'll just start there and then we can kind of progress towards like property taxes and like the village in general. But let's say travel. What are your thoughts on travel and what do you recommend people do with contracts in that area?
So I read the California Vehicle Code back in 2003. I knew I wasn't going to have the money to renew all those contracts. And I began a series of letters with various state officials, Secretary of State, Attorney General, DMV Commissioner, Highway Patrol, or the Director of the DMV, the Commissioner of the Highway Patrol, and the Insurance Commissioner. So those were the main ones, and ultimately the DOT, Department of Transportation. And we kind of came to an agreement that the California Vehicle Code actually did not apply to me. And so, I always consider that we are the exception to the rule. We're not the exemption. We're not in it looking for an exemption. We were never contracted anyway. So it was my walking into the DMV, asking for an application, filling it out, and then requesting a driver's license is what brought me into their system. So I undid all of that. And for a couple of years, I did fine. There was no problems. I was not in the system. My car was not in the system. That was one of the things I'd asked for in my administrative process, was to be removed. And lo and behold, when I finally did get stopped, like 2 years into this, they could not find me or my car in the system, despite the fact that the cop knew me, knew where I lived, knew he'd given me a ticket 2 years or so earlier. My car was not in the system. And then it took them about another day or so to actually put us back into the system. So that really caused me some huge injury. And I realize now, in hindsight, kind of what I did wrong. There were some issues that I did wrong. Be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. Well, I got it. Ultimately, there was one instance where my bail was $920,000 for driving without a license. So I am the $1 million baby. I could have committed 4 murders for that. So, they did go after me pretty heavily. Ultimately, when they did manage to hold me, my actual fine for all of that was $100, and I've never paid that either. So I made an offer and they refused the offer. So I told them that was discharged. So that's what happened with all those cases. I had 5 driving without a license. Like I said, $920,000 was my bail. Mm-hmm. And so I've been through it, and I've tested quite a lot of things out. I do not have a driver's license, have not had one since 2004. I do use license plates or registration plates. I do not believe that they are necessary on a car, but I do like to, I don't want to be oppressed all the time. You know, if you don't have plates on you, you're asking for a fight at every step. And like I said, I did do that for a number of years, and I've done it since 2004 through various cars. It depends on how I titled them. But what I use is South Dakota. South Dakota is very cool. It does not require you to be a resident. They believe in nomads. And so the thing is we never register in our name. We don't use our name because we protect our property. We don't ever register anything within our name. We don't hold property in our name. We always use a different entity, usually an unorganized entity or an unincorporated entity.
So let's talk about that. That's very interesting, Jacquie. So, because we want to help people and even learn ourselves. Like, so, okay, so you don't use your name to register it. What do you use? Do you use a corporation, a nonprofit, other entities, things that have like the social security numbers or EIN numbers?
Always other. And there's no one size fits all. It's always good to get an idea from somebody how they operate. For instance, like I was saying to you earlier, if you're a kid and you really don't care, you're not supporting a family and you want to go out there and drive with no plates, all power to you. I can give you the codes that say you're not required to have them. In California, it's a 260B. Under California Vehicle Code 260B, you're not required to have registration. Registration is only for commercial vehicles found at 260A. So, you know, that's the code that you need to know. However, when you go up against a cop, they don't care. I say, if you're a woman, let's put it this way, as a woman that was out there doing this, I was a lot better off than a young kid. So maybe a young kid is not a good example. You know, people get shot over this kind of stuff. They are revenue generators, and they do get quite nasty if you try and teach them something. So you do have to be careful. So that's one of the reasons why we use South Dakota. So we create an unincorporated association, or it could be a church or anything like that. South Dakota will not require you to have a driver's license when you do that. And as I say, that they do not have you as a resident. So that to us is a very important element. In California, if you register out of state and you register it in your name and you have elements of residency, so let's say I have a kid at school and I go and register in Florida. A lot of people do that here. They have, they'll have registration, let's say Arizona, Florida, or some other place. Nevada is another big one. Or even South Dakota, but they do it in their name, but they have a child at school here. That is a misdemeanor. You have to be very careful when you play around with these laws, because they kind of set them up to trap you. So that's another good reason to put it into an entity name. So once you put it into an entity, now it's not your car, you're not committing any misdemeanor. It's registered somewhere else, and you only have use of it. You have control and use of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and the great thing about South Dakota, you will not require, like I said, no driver's license, no insurance, no smog, none of those things that would be normal in California or maybe normal in other states. You would not be required to have those things. The only time you would be required to have those things is if you use it in South Dakota.
Got it. Okay.
They're nicer to non-residents than to residents.
Okay, so we use those entities, and is that something that's easy to set up, or what's the steps? Easy. Yeah, how can you share briefly how that works, or what do you recommend people?
Sure. Actually, like if you pull up a South Dakota registration form, you literally just transfer the car from your name into a car as you would any other type of transfer. It's that simple. You must have title. You must have the original title, and you must send that in. It's also cheaper at South Dakota. It's about $50, $60, something like that, which is much cheaper than California. Their tax base rate is 4%, but if your car, I think, is 14 years old, something like that, then you don't pay any transfer taxes on it. So there's a lot of pluses in South Dakota. So again, although the preference is no plates, which is absolutely correct. What we do is we create what we consider to be bridge solutions. And I know we had a little chat about that. So a bridge solution is something that we create, a kind of temporary solution for when there's enough people on the bridge, is the way I like to term it.
Yeah. Okay.
So, right now we don't have enough people outside the system. And so the market is not tailored for us yet. So for instance, when I wanted to get a tuxedo for my son, he had a prom, I couldn't get one without a driver's license. No one caters to somebody without a driver's license. I mean, people are like, well, you have to have one.
Right.
So, and it makes it very complicated.
So how do you get around that? Because I've seen that where people, they actually have an identification card. It's like you have to have a state issued ID. What's like, well, there's got to be some type of way that we can identify ourselves without involving the state. Do you have any ideas or experience in that area?
So again, we go through, like, there's a wide range. So technically, there is no requirement for you to have ID unless you're a felon. There's a presumption there, Now, each state does have some little nuances, like you may be in a car, in control of a car, and so there may be some requirement within the statute. But generally speaking, my belief is you shouldn't need any ID, and technically, I bet in most states there is no actual law that would require it. So we found that impractical. When I had no form of ID, all kinds of presumptions start to arise. Now in California, if the person who stopped does not have an ID, the officer is required to take a thumbprint and place it on the back of the citation. And then when you appear in court, you can use that thumbprint to prove that you are who you said you was.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's within the codes. However, it's not really enforced like that, and you'll find cops going nuts when you don't identify yourself. So the best form of identification I created myself, and it was back in 2004, it said, I give myself the right to drive. Not the best language, but it was perfect, because that's exactly what I was doing, was I give myself the right to do that. And it was pretty cool. I actually got stopped. I was in the jail, in property that was owned by a jail, West Valley Detention Center, and I was picking somebody up, and I got stopped by an officer. And the only form of ID, I had no tags, nothing. The only form of ID I had was the one I'd created myself, and that was really interesting. So he did not give me a citation, did not tow the car. He said he was going to be nice and let me go. And he'd called his supervisor, and they told him to leave me alone.
Wow, that's great. Well, it's interesting because that works also for like the press.
Yes.
Like I took the course at Anarchapulco with the We Are Change and Press for Truth, and I think even James Corbett was there the first year. It was like Change Media University, right? Teaching people to become citizen journalists. And they're still alive, I think, or still around, changemediauniversity.org. But anyways, they said this ID, and it was like, it looks like a really good ID. He's like, I basically just took a picture, typed it up, and you can go have these things printed, and you put it in a little pouch, and it says,
plastic pouch. Yeah.
And it's a self-made identification. So there's got to be, there's merit to what you're talking about. That's very interesting. So you can make your own ID, and he let you go. So
yeah, that's the best form I've had. And I do create IDs. I do help people create IDs, but none are necessary. It's just the problem that we seem to have is they're constantly looking for someone to give them authority to do something. Right. People are in fear, and fear is our biggest enemy. Everybody looks for some sort of higher authority to say, yeah, you're right. And it's not going to happen. And the more you keep looking for that, the more I can tell the mindset, let's put it that way. Then I know how much help people need. Right.
So good. So let's talk about, you posted some documents, and we'll approve those, I think probably tonight, just to, kind of space them out, but that looks like some very helpful stuff. And I have a friend, and she's like wanted to start a church, and you kind of mentioned something like that, like there's ministerial type effects or intentions behind a voluntary village, or whatever somebody wants to call it, like a group. So like a foundation, or because I think in the future, if let's say 3 or 4 or 5 families, 8 families, 10 families, whoever it is, we get together, like we kind of link arms with people who we choose to link arms with. We're say, hey, we're going to live together in this area, and we're going to have some type of agreement. So there's almost like a business interest, and kind of this is what happens with like the city and the state. I mean, these are corporations, right? And so they have their tax rolls, and they have a huge apparatus, but we want to have something kind of like smaller, and maybe it's a business, maybe not, but like if we make something official, like this is our village and here's what we agree to, it seems like there might be a way to participate with these other entities. What are your thoughts on that?
So the terminology in terms of church and state, I think most people understand there's a separation of church and state. That is the beginning. Understand, if we're looking at our screen right now, there's me and you. I know those are the other ones, but let's not think about the other ones. We're split. Let's say one of us is the state and one of us is the church. There's a split in the middle. Everything else to do with regulations occurs in the box marked state. None of it occurs in the box marked church. Okay, but then what happened in 1954, there was some little changes to the regulations, and this 501c3 was pushed, and that blurred the line. A bunch of churches went out and started getting the 501c3, and they came under the regulatory profession of the state, basically. The state then told them that they couldn't preach against people that didn't, the politicians that were in power at the time. And so, this line got really blurred. And so 501c3s do not have freedom of speech, which is absolutely unconstitutional, but that's the way it works.
Right.
In terms of, let's go back to the definite split. If you have the definite split is still in the code. It's at 508c1a, which is called a mandatory exception, not an exemption. An exemption comes from within the permission. In other words, you've got, I'm a non-profit corporation, and under 501c3, I can get an exemption. Well, that's all very well. Now they regulate you. But under 508c1a, that's called a mandatory exception because it's split right at the beginning. Now, the thing about that, where a lot of people have problems, is the IRS doesn't regulate those entities. So you're not going to find a whole bunch of stuff in there. You're not going to find a congratulations letter from the IRS saying, congratulations, you found the Exodus. Right. They don't do that. They just tell you there's a mandatory exception right there. There may be a couple of other things that come up, like, any donations are still tax deductible, stuff like that. Like if you donate to my 508c1a, then it is deductible on your side. I don't have to claim it because it's not applicable to me because I'm under a mandatory exception. But if you pay taxes, you can claim it off your taxes.
Wow.
So, that's really the way to go. It's the 508c1a. Now let's talk about what a church is. So churches are pretty funny things. They've never been defined by Congress. Why? Because they cannot question your belief system. Now, this is where Larkin Rose kind of comes in with a nice one, because what does he say? Statism
is a religion.
Is a religion. So my religion happens to be anti-statism, more or less.
Nice.
I don't voice it in that way, but that's technically, it is everything but statism.
Wow.
In other words, so we're looking back at our little boxes. One of those is statism, and let's say you're that one box of statism. The other 5 boxes here are everything else. Statism is very clearly defined exactly what that is. They have rules, regulations, codes, laws, the Constitution, all these different things where they keep putting themselves into this box. You're in a box, but we're everything outside that box. We've never explored beyond that box because they organized religion. When they organized religion, they created the pillar and the post. So you had the post of the king, where you get taxes and codes and statutes. And then you have the pillar of the priests, where you have tithings and religion that restricts us. And we've never really looked outside the pillar, and the post. And I'm
Mm.
excited because I think this is our time to explore. So,
Wow.
this is where we start creating our, like you say, the village and all the other stuff. Actually,
So
creating, but go on.
yeah, absolutely. So do you think that the 501c1A
508,
is
508,
508c1A, that is a potential entity? Is it an entity itself?
So it doesn't have to be fully organized. So let's talk a little bit about organization, because this is really important. And I really, challenge people to come up with some really exciting things. So I'm going to give you an idea of a trust. So I'm going to write a trust indenture. It's going to be just off the top of my head. And this is one of my favorite ones that I like to use. And you have to remember, less is more. I'm always having people that come up to me with like 15-page trust indentures. Hey, what's this look like? And to me, it's like, once you've got past the first paragraph. So this would be a really cool type of trust indenture.
Yeah.
This trust is created to whatever, like hold this property, let's say, or to manage property. If any court attempts to take primary jurisdiction over the administration of this trust will migrate. The trustee can serve without bond and can do anything he needs to in protecting the trust res. That's it. Nothing else is needed.
Wow.
Because every time you say something else, you're restricting and putting yourself inside a box. So that's the great thing. All these codes and all these things that they want to keep creating, all that does is tighten up that little box.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah, so your church, so in my church, for instance, my self-supporting ministry, they're sometimes called that, but in my one, I have a health one. I do believe in good health for everybody and helping people in their health. But one of the key parts is, and it's not verbatim, but it basically says, bringing people back from the world of the dead into the living, because I don't know if you understand that, but that's where the state has us, is in the land of the dead.
Wow.
So, and that's it. That's all we need. That we just need a very brief statement of what it is, and that way your creativity is not stifled. I can do whatever I need to. For an example, I was at a government office, and she said to me, "You need to have a minute order written by the trustee." I go, "Well, does it have to be written or can it be verbal?" She goes, "Well, it could be verbal." So I go, "Hold on a minute." So I looked over my shoulder. I had a chat with myself behind, and I looked back and I go, "Well, I just had a meeting with the board," and they said, and she looked at me like, "Oh," and had to give me what I wanted.
Wow.
You're only stifled by your own writing. You write yourself into corners, or you can write yourself out of corners. A really great book is A Crayon for Harold, A Picture for Harold's Room. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that, but it's a really great children's book where this guy gets given a crayon, he draws himself a picture and then steps into it. I mean, this is what it's about. You can step into your creation by just, writing a minute order or whatever not.
Mm. So that entity is with the 508c1A.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it. And even using that code, don't get hung up too much on it. It's a self-supporting ministry. It's not required to be written. I mean, you can have right there in your one paragraph, minutes do not have to be written. There you go.
Right.
It's written right there. Oh, look, and it's written by the proper authority. I always love that one.
Right. and that's something you would mail to the state.
If you had to, why would you mail it to them in the first place? If you don't have to, you don't have to.
You don't have to. You just say, under this code, under the mandatory exception code,
yeah,
I don't need to do that.
I don't have to do any of that. I'm not required to do any of that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there is also under the code, there is a guy, it's called, oh my God, it's a minister in itinéraire. So a minister in itinéraire is allowed to travel and is entitled to military support and protection while they are traveling. There is no need for driver's licenses or anything. So here you are in your ministry. You can now make yourself a minister in itinéraire. Get yourself one of those nice little badges if you like.
Right. That's beautiful. Well, I think here's the other thing. I was talking with a friend today also. And, you know, you see cops and they're trained, you know, they're not the decision makers. They are order followers, you know, God bless them. I'm sure many of them have good intentions joining the force, but their paycheck depends on it and they got to follow orders. Right. And so also they have their ego, right? So they're taught like, hey, you guys are the law. What you say kind of goes. And then of course there's a natural corruption of human nature, right? So Lord Acton said is that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And they've done those studies of the, what is it, the prison. They did a mock prison, you know, study, and like these students in college were just actors, but they started getting power hungry. So in dealing with cops, I just try to be as calm as possible and, you know, like respect their humanity. But then if you pull up this badge that says I'm a minister and it's a nice flashy badge and you're respectable and, you know, you're kind. I mean, I've seen another situation where the cop, this is on video too, where there was a motorcycle guy going like 100 miles an hour in a 25 zone in the mountains, and he gets pulled over and it's really nice. And he's like, oh, sorry, officer. And long story short, the officer basically escorts him off of the road and says, hey, man, I'm just going to let you off because you're a nice guy and don't do it again. And it was like, wow, the cop let him off. He totally broke this rule, which is, of course, you know, nothing he's obligated to do, but it was the jurisdiction that he assumed. So I think for our viewers, just to be nice and respectful to cops, and maybe,
Yes.
you know, I mean, I love this idea of a minister having a ministerial license or ID where it's like, hey, I'm part of this. And the other thing is that when you know your rights, you know, like, for example, some of the First Amendment auditors out there who, you know, under the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, right, is we have this First Amendment right. And so when the cops come over and say, hey, you can't video record our building, and it says, yes, I can, you know, and it basically the power comes, and then the assertion of the person who knows their rights and says, hey, under this code, you know. And so like you just quoted the
508C1A.
501C18 and then 260B for California Vehicle Code 268, right? So it's like, you know, officer, I know it's a weird thing. I don't have license plates, but according to 260B in my private operation, I don't need that, you know. And so I've seen also people where they actually have the law printed out like on a piece of paper, you know. And so just in case they do get pulled over, they pull it out and they say, hey, officer, you know, this is the capacity that I'm traveling. And they say, well, we need your driver's license. Say, I'm not a driver, I'm a traveler, you know, and having that conversation, but showing them the law. So that's very interesting to me, you know, that you can show them the ID and this travel for the ministerial purposes. I'd like to maybe explore some of that too.
Yeah, the law's a funny thing. So just a quick question. Do you think you're in this state?
Do I think I'm in this state? What? I would say no. Here's the other thing. It's like, you know,
it's a loaded question.
Yeah, I would say no. And here's the other thing is my buddy, I asked, he was learning about this stuff. And also, and this is, you know, he said, where do you live? I said, I live in San Jose. I said, where do you live? He says, I live in my body.
In my body.
And I said, what? That is awesome. So it is. So let me ask you that same question. So do you live in the state? Is that the question?
Well, do you think you're in this state? You know, in this state?
I don't know. I just know the state is, yeah,
it's a legal term.
Yeah, it's a coercive organization. And if I didn't get tricked into having a driver's license and all these things, I wouldn't have it, you know? So now it's like, how do you undo that? I've heard people try to, or recommend to unregister to vote so you're no longer in the voting registrar.
In the voting. Actually, on my website, the idpsolutions.org, I have a really nice cancellation of registration to vote. People who are not even registered should send it in, because it actually lays out some of the reasons why we shouldn't vote. It is coercive. It is a red and blue situation. It's putting people against people, you know, neighbor against neighbor. It's not a good thing. There's so many reasons why we shouldn't vote, but one of the big ones is because of residency. So the term in this state, it's actually a taxable forum. The officer is in this state. He's a revenue, you know, he's actually revenuing you, bringing you into the in this state forum, just so that he can write you the citation. And just to give you an idea, in this state means within the exterior limits of the state of California, and includes all territory within these limits owned by or ceded to the United States. So if you're not on property that's owned by or ceded to the United States, And seated has some other meanings. It's more to do with the contractual obligations that we have. It doesn't necessarily mean a physical location. It can also be a paper interaction and a nexus with the state. So when you start to look at some of this terminology, you find out, hey, I'm not a person. I'm not in this state. Actually, I'm not a person unless I fill out an application, then I become the person.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's really interesting when you start to look at it. And so a lot of people look to change their status. The easiest way to change your status is to contract all of those agreements that you have with the state, all of those applications that you filled out, and stop filling out applications. That's the first thing. You know, kind of like when you're in a car and you're about to hit something, first thing you do is take your foot off the gas.
Right.
Stop filling out forms with the state. That's number one.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Yeah, stop participating in their game. And we talked about this before. It was a really great thing what you shared is when you move counties, the counties don't communicate with each other. So if you kind of want to effectively disappear, it sounded like in some ways, you can do that. And
especially with children. So juvenile situations are with the county. And so moving county, for instance, I know you might have people who want to get out of the school system, and unhooking can be difficult sometimes. You know, they don't want to take the religious exemption anymore. Literally just moving county and never registering them in the new county makes all the difference. So that's what I did with my 9th grader.
Got it. Now, I've had experience because I had a nonprofit organization, and this is when I was just learning about the school system, and I was like, let's do this and make it a thing. And then looking at all the paperwork and then learning about how churches get controlled by the 501c3, it's like I'm participating. Like, I'm not making money, I'm losing money, and then I got to pay you guys $700 a year for the privilege to have this nonprofit organization where I'm losing money. I'm going to pay you all that money. Like my budget was like $4,000 or something small, and I'm like losing all this money. So I got to pay you guys. So I said, I'm just going to stop participating, and I want to engage. And this, I started learning about the blockchain and how you can have currency and new contracts on the blockchain and just have voluntary contracts. So can this ministry, which you mentioned, the 508, or any other ones, can we open bank accounts with these things, or what do you recommend there?
Yeah, so before the Know Your Customer came out, we've been doing this a number of years, and so we've seen the laws tighten up. That's making a lot of noise, babe. So before the Know Your Customer, which is the KYC that the banks use, it was pretty easy to do. Now you need to get at least an EIN in order to, and you get it for just banking purposes. So it's not to file any returns or anything else like that, but the entity can get a bank account, and you can hook up PayPal and do all the other things you would normally do with a bank. So yeah, no problems. But we do use that. Just let's be clear. It would be a non-interest bearing account. Those are better. You do not want to have accounts that report on you.
Got it.
Okay, let's have a look here. So that's a really good question, Doug.
So Doug just asked, he asked, when you get a job, how do you deal with the social security number? And I'll let you answer that because you're the expert on that and you had a good conversation about that.
Great question. It's actually a huge problem that we have. It really depends on the type of job that you have. If you have a job where you can go through 1099, that's really easy, not a problem. And that way you would create an entity like an unincorporated association or some other type of entity. And that would be the entity that would actually contract. There are other ways to do that too. For instance, you could obtain some other form of tax identification number, but employers, they check. So you couldn't just use it. You would really need to be self-reliable. It's better if you're a self-starter and you go out and create your own businesses. And I know that's not for everybody, but what I'd like to suggest is start thinking of ways. Don't sell yourself freaking short. Don't let somebody else use you. You know, there are ways that we can use our skills and put it to our own purposes, working for ourselves as opposed to working for an employer. So the first thing would be to, talk to the employer and see what he would do. We did have one guy. He was a printer. He had specific skills, and it took them 6 months or so. They did not pay him for 6 months, but he kept working there and he could wait. And ultimately they got pissed off, and he went to the labor board. They had to pay him everything. So, there's also that Taco Bell case. I've heard about it. I have not pulled up the whole thing, but there was one in Taco Bell. I did have a friend. So he was an employer, and he kept insisting on the I-9, and there's another form that you have to fill out. It evaded me right now. Yeah. But anyway, he kept asking for those forms, and he got in trouble. He actually got fined $20,000 for insisting that the person fill it out. In other words, your employer can only ask you to complete them. They cannot force you to complete them. And there's a $50 fine. So one thing you might want to do, if you're actually working for somebody and you want to change your status, offer them the $50. Tell them, hey, here's $50. I don't want my social security number listed anymore. So, wow. So there are ways. It's just really difficult when you work for somebody else.
Yeah. So 1099 or figure out your own business.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing for us to remember, and I saw this report, I can't remember what giant corporation predicted, that the future is about independent contracting. I think like 50% of the workforce by 2030 is going to be independent contracting, self-employed type situations, because the economy is changing so quickly, and they can't predict. These giant organizations can't move as fast as a nimble individual. And then the American dream is not American, it's a human dream. And the human dream is to have your own livelihood so that you can chart your own course in life. And a job was something that somebody else would give you temporarily, and then you were saving up money so that you could start your own thing. So this is, some of the stuff that I'm doing and helping other people out there. Think about, your 2-year, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year goal to get free so that you can have time freedom. And then I think the big one is a digital nomad. Like, we got to make some money online so that we can be flexible. We're not attached to some location, because we don't know when shit's going to hit the fan. And this is why the villages is really important, because it's going to be somewhere out in nature, hopefully away from metro cities, away from highways and freeways. And this is a whole other conversation that we're having in the Voluntary Village Creators Group, strategically setting up locations with your own self-sustainability, food, water, everything right there. So we don't need to participate. I mean, this is, I think, a very smart move, because like you said, we're 3 generations down this corporate, hellhole, basically, where we don't know how to grow our own food. And we should learn, because if you plant an apple seed, you get apple fruits, and that's free. Basically, you get the water, you get the care in the beginning, but to have food growing like the food forest, around us, they're so liberating in that way. And so I think that's really important too, so, and then you said before, like, when an authority or somebody asks you, if you have a social security number, you can say, I don't have a social security number. Can you talk a little about that? Maybe what you tell authority figures about that?
You want to be very careful with that. So, that worked for a while. So there is a code, Title 42 40888. In that one, it says basically that they cannot force you to give them a social security number, but there are certain, with other laws accepting. So let's say for the passport, for instance, we would all say we don't have one. Well, the terminology is not quite correct. It's you was assigned one. It may not be your number, because it isn't your number. It's owned by Social Security. So is the card. It's not your property. It's actually their property. So you want to be very careful the way that you make that statement. You do have a right to not use it under Title 5. So you have a right to privacy, and you have a right to not use the number. And so for the most part, the idea is stop using it. Just don't use it. If you have to use it. So the one instance I say where I have to use it is a passport. Although I did not use it on my passport application, when I got a copy of the application, they look it up and add it into the for office use only section. I personally refuse to give it.
Got it.
So I don't use it at all for anything else. There's nothing else that I know of. I don't have driver's license. It doesn't come up. I don't use it for registration. I don't use it for bank accounts. I, just stopped using it. Now my son, he's 23, and he's, I took him out of school in 9th grade, and he's never used it for anything. Does not have a driver's license, has not contracted with anybody, doesn't even know what it is.
And he doesn't have any troubles or any issues with like bank accounts or anything so far?
No, we open up bank accounts fine for him. He uses unincorporated associations or other types of entities. He has been stopped by police before, and he handles himself fairly well.
Yeah, because some of the evolution that we're aiming for is to teach families to get out of the system, because the state is intergenerational organized crime.
It is.
And they fake us out, they trick us. And, my parents love me, but they got me these things that I didn't agree to. So they contracted me. It's almost like it's an invalid contract because it wasn't under my consent. So we want, families, and this is the question, the passport, how are they going to get a job or get travel passports without the social and registering their birth certificate?
Yeah, and so I want to look at that for a minute. So I went to renew my U.S. passport, and they denied me because of child support arrears. And I see that a lot. So there's something called a Nansen passport. I'm going to type it in here just so you guys can look it up. It's Nansen, Nansen passport. Now, Nansen passport is a type of passport that exists that is for stateless persons. IDP Solutions stands for internally displaced people. We are all internal within our country that we live, and we have been displaced by the law. It really ticks me off when someone, you want to travel, you have every right to travel, and they want to trap you in here and stop you from traveling. Another way you may be denied a passport would be because you owe more than $50,000 in taxes. And then maybe a couple of other reasons, but I see that a lot: child support arrears and unpaid taxes. Now, anyone that owes the IRS, let's say you owe them $20,000, it very quickly doubles or even trebles because you get penalties and interest. So you might not owe as much as $50,000, but there may be penalties and interest, and that will make it over $50,000, and they will stop you from leaving. But what we're looking into is the Nansen style passport. So there is another one. It's called the World Passport. It is created by World Service Authority. We use them as private IDs. We have not been able to travel on them, although people have. There's a lot on the website that show that people are able to travel on them. If you go to an embassy, and let's say you wanted to travel to Egypt or something, if you went to Egypt and the Egyptian embassy or consulate and kind of took your passport and tell them, hey, I'm not contracting with the state, I'm a minister in itinéraire, and I don't, because it's actually allowed for foreign travel as well. So let's look at the ministry situation, and they should be able to give you a visa after they've checked you out. So there should be no reason why you shouldn't be able to travel even though you don't have a passport.
So for the Nansen passport, do they require a social security number?
No, and certainly under the World Passport. So the World Passport was created by an attorney, and he did it because he did not want to be a U.S. citizen anymore because of the war. I don't know if it was Vietnam, but it was one of the wars that they were engaged in, and he did not want to participate and be part of that. There's many reasons why many of us do not want to be deemed U.S. citizens, and much of it is their cartel behavior.
Right. Yeah.
Under the Nuremberg principles, if you go along with what the state is doing, then you are a participant and you are just as guilty as the state, and I'm not going to participate in that. So
right. Yeah. And this is the power, stepping a little sidestep here, is about the power of civil disobedience, right? Yeah. And we don't have to be violent with them, because if we be violent, now they can have excuse to beat us up or kill us or whatever it is. Yeah. And this is why I recommend you video and audio record any interaction, especially with enforcers. And they've been so bad that they have to record themselves, but that's still untrustworthy. So you want to have, if you can, some video cameras or your cell phone rolling, because they do behave better when they know that they're being recorded. And again, talking earlier about being, kind of respectful with them for their humanity, not for their badges, but that's the fact that they're humans and they don't know what they're doing. They actually believe that they have legitimate authority. And we are part of the group that has said, I have unalienable rights and they're natural rights, and here's what they are. And so even like this is a few years ago, I had a cop pull me over, and I think it was the carpooling, right? You can only drive in the carpooling if you have two people in the car. And so he pulls me over, and it's this like $400 bill or whatever. And so I was kind of in a bad mood, and I wasn't being like rude. I was just like, I said, well, I called up my lawyer. I had like this something product called Legal Shield, and he's like, he's taking too long. And I said, well, what if I don't sign it? He said, if you don't sign it right now, I'm going to take you to jail right now. And I was like, wow, okay. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are in signing citations. Do you sign it and then write void under it? Do you sign it and then put under duress, or do you not sign it at all? What do you do when the cop says, hey, you have to sign this because I'm going to force you to do it? What do you do there?
So it really depends on your situation. So I have a UCC filed, which makes me the authorized representative. Generally, what happens is I will sign non-assumpsit, and I sign as the authorized representative for the fiction, and I get away with doing that. So yeah, different people sign different things.
So what is that? What's a sunset? What does that mean? So I've heard the UCC. Yeah, can you talk about that, please?
Yeah. So well, non-assumpsit means basically I'm not accepting the contract. So nothing that hasn't been fully disclosed to me. And as we know, there's a lot of stuff in there that has not been fully disclosed. I haven't had a ticket for a very long time. I've been stopped maybe 4 times in the last 5 or 6 years, and I've never received a ticket for any of those. The last ticket I got was in 2013. I've kind of cleaned up my situation after the $920,000. I've done a lot of learning.
Yeah, right.
And so now that I've created my own forms of ID, had my car with various different types of registration. I had one where it was in a foreign trust with my own plate on it, or whether and I've been stopped in that, or whether I've had the South Dakota plate. It's never, transpired into a citation. So, but I would write the non-assumpsit because I'm not contracting with them. There's no deal here, is what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah, and this is another point to help us remember and learn and help teach kids and younger people who are learning about this stuff, is that you are the sovereign, and that's been a word that's kind of been bastardized with like sovereign citizen, but like you are like your own king, and you have your own authority. That's I think where the word comes from. Authority is you're authoring your own life, and this is what many of the great breakthroughs, like Magna Carta or these like you mentioned Nuremberg. This is all evolution to help free humanity, because humanity, after hundreds of thousands of people get killed or millions of people get killed, humanity finally gets together and be like, well, what are we doing? Like we got to like make something rules or something. And now I think the next evolution is beyond statism. I really think if we can get these ideas out there, self-ownership, non-aggression, yes. It's basic. The questions of who's going to build the roads, that's been, addressed by many people. And actually, there's private roads. Would you believe it? And so when I get that question of like, who's going to build the roads, I say, people are going to build the roads. Okay. People, and they say, like you said, what is the state? It's a belief. If you go to a building like this, the building is not the state. This piece of paper is not the state. Where is the state? It's like invisible. It's in your head. That's correct. So like helping people understand that, I think is, some of the good work too. And then learning some of the lawful or the legal, whatever the word you use, to help them understand that you are the author, and you can engage with people that you want to engage with. And if not, you resist or you reject. It's kind of an offer, a buy or a sell. And if somebody is forcing you, then you want to, ask them about that. Say, hey, if I don't sign this citation, what will happen? Oh, I'm going to take you to jail. Oh, so you're now you are the using force. I'm going to sign this under duress. And I can't remember what it was. One of my buddies said that you can like write something on there so like it invalidates your sign.
Threat, coercion, force, threat, and coercion. I had a judge that turned around and said, well, how else are we supposed to get you to sign? So not always a really good way of doing it. I do like the non-assumption. So I wrote the actual definition of that is.
Good.
So, but I'd like to just say something about what Doug has said there. So
Yeah.
he had a DL in Indiana, but it expired in 2005. And I have lived in Illinois since 2007. Never had a DL in Illinois, but they suspended the DL they created. I see this a lot. I see it more with the fact that, let's say you allow the license to lapse. And I'm going to put this in another term. So let's say I'm your landlady. You have a lease with me. Let's say I lease the house to you for a year and a half. You live there a year and a half, pay your rent on time and everything else like that. The lease is now technically up. You continue to live there. You continue to pay me. We no longer have a lease. We now have a month-to-month rental. It changed. The style of the lease changed. Mm-hmm. It's very much the same thing with your DL. It's another lease, right? It's renewable every 4 years or every 6 years, or where, depending on the state that you're in, there will be a certain amount of time. It's a renewable lease. So it comes under the laws of leases. So here you are, you never properly canceled it. And there you are caught, we're going to call it driving, okay? You had a driver's license and now you're caught driving. And it's presumed that, hey, you forgot to renew your license because you never really canceled it. And I found that people that canceled their driver's licenses properly, in California, that would be a DL 142. And there are various forms throughout. So if you find the correct form for your state, I like Texas. Texas is always great. They always have great ones. I just don't want it anymore, or some statement like that. You know, there's a box to check. Texas is always great. So California tries to keep you in no matter what. They have these long arm laws that try to keep you in. But so if you didn't cancel it properly, it's presumed that you just forgot to do it. So now in that situation, what I would say, Doug, is make sure you and your stuff, I mean, like, let's say now you're traveling in a car and that car is in your name and you are caught with a suspended license, suspended driver's license, the chances are they may take your car. Now, what we found is, and let's say now, as we know, they scan. So now they're traveling around and they're scanning cars and they see your name flashes up, that you own a certain car that's right in front of them. Now they're going to presume that you're the driver of that car, and they already know before they stop you that you don't have a driver's license. So you become a target because you're in a car that's in your name. So again, we go back to that point. Protect your stuff. Don't have stuff in your name. That way you're not a target. And I think we're better off when we do that. And then if you get stopped, you really don't care about what they do. You don't have anything hanging out in the system. And that's really the way you want to deal with stuff, is to have you and yourself and your stuff protected, your people, whoever it is that's in your family. You always want to protect everybody around you. Otherwise, the state grabs it.
So by not having your name on the car or whatever else, then that's going
targeted. Yeah, because they scan. They literally scan and they go, oh, look, there's Doug. Oh, look, Doug comes up as not having a driver's license, but he has a car. Well, that's kind of weird. Why would you have a car if you don't have a driver's license? We need to pull over the car. They'll find some reason, tail lights out. You know, fifth light is out. What the heck is a fifth light? I mean, I've heard all kinds of weird stuff that pull people over for, you know.
Right. Yeah, there's a great video. And this is all learning, right? It's like the cops come up to the guy and he's doing it to say, you know, do you know that person back there? And he says, I don't answer questions. And there's another video that he comes and knocks on the window. And he rolls down the window. Hey, ask him a question. I don't answer questions.
I don't answer questions.
It's like, and it does like 5 or 6 cops, and they're like, okay, I guess I'll leave. So, you know, he was kind of a strong man, but like, I think if we say that, you know, nice and respectfully, and I don't answer questions, you know, this is my right. I have a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate myself, and I don't answer questions. Then because they're not trained in the law, or maybe whatever reason, they don't know what to do, because most everybody just acquiesces and says, oh yeah, you know, whatever it is. But when you assert yourself and say, I don't answer questions, then they're kind of at a loss of what to do.
So the reason why that works is because Everything up until the point that you hand them a driver's license is voluntary. The whole stop is at that point, like from the point of when they flash their lights, which means there's emergency for a start. I always say, no, I didn't stop for you. I pulled aside because I thought you had an emergency and you needed to pass me by. That's the reason why I stop. It's not for any other reason. Right. And so, and if you don't hand them a driver's license, then all your question is am I free to go? Mm-hmm. You don't answer questions. Am I free to go? That's it. That's all that should be discussed at the side of the road. And the reason that works is because you are not volunteering any information. I'm not giving you a license. I'm not giving you my name. Am I free to go? That's it.
Right. And so when they come up, because they'll say license and registration. Yeah. Do you hand them your homemade ID, or what do you do at that point?
It really depends. So I've handled this in several ways. Am I required to give you one? Oh, yes.
Right.
Really? Where does it say that?
Right. Right.
Yeah. On the whole, since I've had my stuff kind of sorted out, yeah, I usually just hand it. Like I say, I've been stopped 4 or 5 times in the last 5 years or so. And yeah, and they just look at it and go, okay, well, I really don't know what to do with this. Have a nice day. Slow down, ma'am. Whatever.
Wow. So you hand them that. Is it the one that says, I give myself the right to drive?
No, I've kind of progressed a little bit, although that was my favorite. That was my favorite one. I mean, I now have what's called an international driver's permit. So I create internet IDPs, and I use one of those, and often what's called a world passport, which is also a private form of ID. And they don't like it, but I mean, what can I say? If you've got the correct evidence that you have canceled the driver's license and therefore you've given up the privilege to drive, it really, that's the best piece of evidence that you can have, is just proof that you canceled your driver's license.
Wow, that's interesting. So yeah, because I've seen the videos too where the guy said, and the cop knew about it. He's like, oh yeah, you're in the process. You got to go to the DMV, and cancel it and whatever conversation. I'm like, you can do that? Like, I didn't know you had to do that. So the other part is like driver's license is an ID. So I guess you make a homemade ID and you have the cancellation of your driver's license and you have an international driver's permit or the world passport, something, right? Something to show them that you're not a felon or, like whatever they're looking for.
It's complicated because they really do, kind of meander through rights. And, one of the best forms of ID for anybody out there and for people that like to create their own stuff is literally send yourself some registered mail. Now, here's all the stuff here. You do not want to have a zip code on it. So you want to use the common law kind of address system. So, literally you could use your rural free route or some other route, or general delivery is even better. If you can arrange at your general post office to have general delivery there, send yourself a registered letter to general delivery. And then, on the inside, you can have your little photo and all that other stuff. That is the best form of evidence there is of who you are and where you receive mail. And you can actually have a statement in there that says, I'm not a resident of this state or nor a resident of any state of the United States. Therefore, the address I'm giving you is solely for the purposes of receiving mail.
So you would put that address on the letter, but not the zip code?
Well, at that point, because it's a post office, it won't matter. And if you use care of, it also won't matter. Usually the post office is whatever the 5 zip is plus 9998. General delivery is usually the 9998. And so, yeah, that works out pretty well. That's a really high form. So it just so people know, if you don't have ID on you and you get stopped and the cop searches your car and finds a piece of mail, they will use that piece of mail to identify you. So that's why registered mail is a good thing. Registered mail is also non-domestic. And so the fact that you're receiving non-domestic mail and you're picking it up at the post office will not tie you into the zip code areas and will not tie you into residence. You can write whatever you want in there, have a nice photo of you, you know, whatever you want to write. Write your name the way you want to write it. All the things you want to write about yourself with your status, you can put that in there.
And that would be that would be on the letter inside the envelope.
Inside the envelope, yeah. And you fold over the letter, you know, make it a nice legal size. Fold it in such a way. Put your registered mail in there with the address, and that becomes part of the document. It's perfect.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
best form of ID you could probably have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm so grateful we got to share some time, Jacquie, because this is such important information. I'm sure we could go longer and explore things. And it sounds like you have just done a load of research and have great experiences. So thanks for sharing. I think your website is idpsolutions.org.
Yes, idpsolutions.org.
Okay.
And the idea is to work on canceling various contracts. So there's one on traffic. There's one on, you know, voters registration. I do want to put up a page about getting your children out of school. And of course I will want to have a link to your stuff, because I think that's really important. We have to disconnect from their system. We need to create our own. Right. Just very quickly,
yep.
Foreign licenses work great, perfect, no problems with those. And then I love my mother told me not to talk to strangers. So I come out with the same thing in terms of court. My mom told me not to go down dark alleys, and the court system is a dark alley, and you do not know what's waiting down the end. So I love that analogy.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. My mom told me not to talk to strangers. That's beautiful in the foreign license. So yeah, we'll continue the conversation here, and hopefully we'll do maybe a Facebook Live in the future, and we'll get. Yeah, we'll oh, don't worry about it. What's fine. And then we'll upload this probably in the creators group, or maybe on YouTube and such. So thanks for sharing this great information. And to the audience, you guys are free. You're born free. You own yourself. And these fictions are the criminal organizations. They use coercion, they use fraud, they use intimidation. And in order for humanity to have a peaceful, happier, freer, healthier world, we have to take courage and try to build these things. The great quote by Buckminster Fuller is, "You never change reality by fighting against it." We got to create a new model that makes the old model obsolete. So this is what cryptocurrency is doing. This is what these other, you know, this type of solutions, the common law type stuff, voluntary villages or relationships, and, you know, be part of the solution as we are. If you're watching this, you are part of the solution. You're a visionary. Jacquie, you're a visionary. Thanks for sharing your expertise here. We'll link to the video in the description, and we'll see you in the Voluntary Village Creators group, and maybe we'll do a camp out again and come meet some of these awesome people. Doug, Ajah, thanks for joining us. The military guy, the iPhone, these guys. We'll see you next time here on the Freedom Lover Show. We're building a voluntary world, one relationship at a time. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.